Hello there, it's Juliana Michaels and welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm sharing more ways you can use the new Tim Holtz Distress Spritz to add color and shine to your cards. If you haven't heard the news, Tim Holtz has just released 12 new colors of Distress Spritz to add to the Distress Spritz family. And the colors he's added are Kitsch Flamingo, Fired Brick, Saltwater Taffy, Rusty Hinge, Antique Linen, Crushed Olive, Mowed Lawn, Cracked Pistachio, Tumbled Glass, Prize Ribbon, Seedless Preserves, and Vintage Photo. Now if you aren't super familiar with the Distress Spritz, I do have another video when these first came out that I shared a bit about the Distress Spritz and how it works and shared some ways that you could use it. In this video, I'm going to go over a little bit of the basics on how to use it as well, but I'm also going to show you some new ways to use it from how I'd shared them in the last video. So one of the biggest things though you want to make sure with the Distress Spritz is that you shake it up really well. So as you can see, when I tilt this over, there's no pigment or anything sitting on the bottom of this bottle. And that's because it's all mixed in really well. That mica and pigment are all mixed in with the liquid in there so that when you spray it, you're less likely to have your nozzle clog on you and you're just going to get a better coverage with the shimmer. So if when you pick up the bottle and you tilt it over and you can see that there's a lot of that pigment sitting on the bottle, either on the bottom or on the side, depending on how you've had these stored. There's a little rattling ball in there and you just want to shake that and mix all of that up until when you tilt this over, all of that pigment is mixed in and not sitting kind of clumped together like that anywhere. Here's a look at the swatches I created using the new colors. I talk you through how I create them in a previous video, and I'll have that linked in the description box below. These are the swatches that I made with the new colors, and then these are swatches from the first 12 colors that came out. And I thought it might just be kind of fun to do a little bit of a comparison of the colors. So there's Kitsch Flamingo and Picked Raspberry, so we've got a nice light pink and a dark pink. And then there's Fired Brick and Barn Door, so again, two very different reds to add to the color palette. We've got Saltwater Taffy, Worn Lipstick, again, definitely different in their colors. Spiced Marmalade and Rusty Hinge. Got Antique Linen and Fossilized Amber for a couple of yellows. We've got Crushed Olive and Twisted Citron. Mowed Lawn and Peeled Paint. We've got Cracked Pistachio and Peacock Feathers. Tumbled Glass and Uncharted Mariner. And then Prize Ribbon as another blue, and Weathered Wood, which you can kind of call a blue or a gray, kind of depending on which way you like to lean there. And then we've got Preserved, and then we've got Seedless Preserves and Wilted Violet for some purples. And then beautiful neutrals here with the Vintage Photo and Walnut Stain. So as you can see, it's quite a lovely color palette with all of them together, and just lots of options when you start mixing and matching these to create your own color combinations. So the supplies I'm going to be using to create the cards in this video is this Ringer stencil from Tim Holtz, the French Garden stamp set, Perspective stamp set, and Field Notes. And I'm going to be using this just to create some embellishments for the card. And with this one, I'm going to really be just only using this large butterfly. And off this set, I'm going to be using this flower. So these are going to kind of be the main focal point images. So you could pick something that you like for that. And then if you're interested and notice it in the card, there are also coordinating die sets available for some of Tim's stamp sets at Simon Says stamp. So this French Garden, actually have the die set for that one. And so I did use it to cut out that flower, but you could easily fussy cut this image if you'd like, and which is what I'm going to do on the butterfly. So for the other mediums, of course, I'm going to be using Distress Spritz, and the colors I'm using are Saltwater Taffy, Cracked Pistachio, Vintage Photo, and Rusty Hinge. Got Distress watercolor pencils in some of the same colors. So I've got Saltwater Taffy, Shabby Shutters, Ground Espresso, and Fossilized Amber. Got Distress ink in Cracked Pistachio and Vintage Photo. And then I'll be doing the stamping with the archival ink in Ground Espresso, just for some sort of a permanent ink there so that the ink doesn't bleed when I do work with the spritz in the other mediums. As always, I encourage you to use the supplies that you already own. However, if you are interested in any of the products I'm using, you can find the full supply list with links in the description box below. Click on the word more to see more. When you shop through those links, you're supporting me at no extra cost to you, and I really appreciate that so very much. So the first thing we're going to do is take a piece of distressed watercolor cardstock cut to 4 by 5 1/4 inches, or whatever size you want to use to create your card. I'm going to be layering this onto another piece of paper to create an A2 size card, so you can make it larger if you like. And then I'm working with some cracked pistachio, and I'm just going to ink smush that, as you saw, onto my craft mat. Spritz that with a little water. The more water you add, the more watery the effect we'll get with this. I like to have a little bit of some of those drips and drops to add a little interest to the background. So if you want it more flowy, you can add more water. And then I just kind of like to rotate the paper around so that I'm not getting ink in the same places everywhere. And if there's some spots you want some ink that you don't have it, kind of dab it with your finger a little bit to add to, and then I'm going to dry that with my heat tool. And you kind of want to just do this into layers. So add some ink and dry it, and then add some more if you want to add more color and more layers. I'm just going to dab off a little bit of that excess there. And then for this card, I'm going to be adding quite a few layers of interest to it. So I'm going to just go with that one time, dip into the ink, and then continue on to the next layer. And now we're going to take another panel and do the same thing. And you might need a little bit more ink, so you could just add a little bit more to your craft mat. And spritz that again with a little more water and kind of break up those bigger droplets. And we're just going to dip into that ink and kind of do that exact same process all over again. And then on this one, I'm going to dip again just to kind of show you how that adding another layer of ink once you've dried it just keeps building layers. And then you can just continue doing that as you like till all the ink is off your craft mat, or if you want to add more, just add more ink and keep on smushing and drying. Now I'm taking that first ink smushed background and I'm going to add some stamping. I'm going to take the image and put it here in my stamping platform. You could also use stamping blocks if you like. And I'm going to take some images from the Field Notes stamp set, definitely one of my all-time favorites. And I'm going to just stamp a few of these images kind of across this background here. I'll pick those up. And then I'm going to stamp those with archival ink and Ground Espresso. And you do want to use some sort of permanent ink if you don't want these images to smear or bleed. But you could certainly, you know, if it doesn't bother you if they bleed a little bit, you could certainly stamp these with whatever kind of ink you want. Now we have our two panels. We added some stamping to one of them, and the other one we did the repeated ink smooshing. So this one has one layer of ink smooshing on it. This one has a couple, and now we're gonna add the next layer. So now we're gonna add some Distress Spritz, and for that I'm gonna be, and anytime I'm working with a spray ink, I like to work in a splat box. It just keeps the mess contained and a little bit easier to clean up. I'm not having to clean off my desk as well, or my craft mat. So first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take this background without the stamping on it. You could do either one, whichever way you want. And then I'm just gonna position the stencil here on the paper. And before you begin working with the spritz, you wanna make sure you get all of that pigment mixed in. So if you see some kind of solid areas there of the pigment that isn't mixed in, then you just need to make sure you shake it really well, get that little rattle ball rattling, and kind of tilt it over every now and then, take a peek and make sure all that's getting mixed in really well before you start working with it. All right, so that looks pretty mixed in to me. So now we're just gonna add some sprays of this ink through the stencil. And this is Rusty Hinge. And this is Rusty Hinge and Vintage Photo that I'm working with here. And as you can see, there is our background. We're going to just set this to the side for a second here while I do the next one. And this is kind of like a 2-for-1 technique. So now you're going to position the other paper in your craft box, and then I'm going to spritz this stencil with just a little water to kind of reactivate that ink. I'm going to do that over kind of here to the side. And now I'm going to position this stencil on top of my other background. And I'm going to take a clean paper towel and just kind of lay that over the top and just rub over the surface. This will kind of absorb any excess ink that might seep out from under the stencil. And then you're just kind of pushing that ink, transferring it onto the paper. And now we're just going to peel that up. And there is a look at the other background. So now we have these two different backgrounds. One spraying directly through the stencil, and then this one is what I call mono printing, where you're taking kind of that leftover ink that was on the stencil and using it to create a background as well. And then from here, if you want to use your heat tool to dry this, you can. So here's a look at those finished backgrounds, and you can really see that shimmer and shine from the Distress Spritz there. And same thing here with this one. And then once that's completely dry, it's not going to rub off on your hands or the paper or anything. So you just want to make sure that, like, if you get some areas where it's really kind of like a thick application of the spray, it's going to take a little bit longer to dry. So just make sure you let that dry really well, and then it won't smudge or smear onto anything. So the next thing I want to do with this background is I'm going to add some splatters using the Distress Spritz. So this is just another way that you can use these. So again, you just want to make sure you get all that pigment mixed in really well. And then once that's done, you can just take off the nozzle. You have a little ink there on the end, and you just tap that onto your paper to create some splatters. You can also use a paintbrush with this if you wanted. And then as before, just dry this with your heat tool or let it dry. And the color I used for this was Cracked Pistachio. And then again, that just adds another little layer of interest and distress to the background. So now we're going to take the Distress Spritz and do some coloring. And again, you just want to make sure you get all of that mica mixed in really well. And then once that's done, you're just going to put a little bit of that onto your craft mat. And you're going to take a dry brush and wet that, dip that into your spritz, and then you're going to pull the pigment off of the Distress watercolor pencil here. And this is Saltwater Taffy as well. And you're going to use that to color in your image. And it's going to add a little shimmer and shine to the areas that you want to add shimmer and shine to. So like, you know, if you don't want the whole thing shiny, you certainly don't have to. And by pulling the color off of the watercolor pencil here, you're going to get more of that Saltwater Taffy color. So it's just going to be a little more pigmented. Because the spritz is really just a very light wash of color. It's not meant to be a solid coverage like a regular spray is, like any of the other distress sprays. Got that colored in. And then yeah, you just kind of continue with that wherever you want to add the little bit of sparkle and shine. And now we're gonna, just to kind of show you the difference here, we're gonna clean off that brush a little bit, and then I'm gonna clean off any spritz that's on the pencil. And then I'm just gonna take a little water and use that brush to just pull this straight off color. And you're going to see that it'll just be, we can kind of go a little lighter with it and just give a little light wash with just the watercolor pencil to the other areas here. And the light wash is coming from me just using more water than pigment. So you could also get it you could get it darker if you want to add more pigment than water. This just gives it a little bit of interest with the light and dark areas there. And then once that's dry, this is where it's going to get hard to see. But in person, this area here is definitely got a little bit of shimmer to it. It's just very hard to catch in the light here that I have. And then I'm just going to take a little bit of the Ground Espresso Distress Crayon and kind of use that to color in the body here on the butterfly. And give that a dry. I have intentionally not moved my stamp or the paper, and I'm just going to take that same ink that we stamped with originally and re-ink the stamp and then re-stamp that image just to make it pop so you can kind of see the difference there after that second re-stamping. And then from here, I'm just going to take some scissors and fussy cut that out. And I am not going to worry about keeping the antenna or trying to trim around those, but if you're skilled with the scissors, you go for it. So as far as some other embellishments that you could create, so this is one I made to put onto the other background, and this is just an image from the French Garden stamp set that I colored in using the Distress Spritz and watercolor pencils, just like I did the butterfly. And the colors I used on here were Saltwater Taffy, Shabby Shutters, and then a little bit of fossilized amber on the center of the flower. And I just used the spritz on the flower, so you can just see a little bit of shimmer there on the flower. Another thing I'm going to do is I stamped some of the field notes labels onto some watercolor cardstock, and I'm just going to do some ink smushing with those using some old paper distress ink, and I'm just going to ink smush and kind of create some vintage labels with these. Dry those. And then you can re-smush these as many times as you like just to kind of build up some layers. And then go from there. And then I just fussy cut those with some scissors. And now I'm just going to ink the edges here just to give them a little bit more of a distressed effect with some vintage photo. And then, if you want to distress those a little more, you can do a little more spritzing. And dab that. And then just dry those with your heat tool, and they are ready to be used on your project. To finish off these backgrounds a little bit, I'm going to just do some ink blending around the edges with a little vintage photo. You could probably also use the ground espresso for this if you wanted to continue with that kind of darker color, but I just wanted something that was a little lighter, but just give it a little bit of a vintage look. So you kind of add as much of that as you like. Then those are ready to go. Here's a look at the completed cards that I created in this video. To finish off each one, I took a piece of white cardstock, cut it to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches, and inked the edges with vintage photo distress ink. For this floral card, I tore along the right-hand edge of the background we created during the video to add a little interest, and then inked that edge with vintage photo distress ink. On this butterfly card, I added some die cuts to create additional layers and texture. I used a piece of vellum to cut and emboss the Tim Holtz Switchlets seal die. I then ink smushed distress watercolor cardstock with some old paper distress ink and die cut it with one of the greenery pieces from the Tim Holtz Garden Greens die set. I also added some machine stitching to each card for a little more texture. As for the sentiments, I decided not to put one on either of these cards, but you could certainly add one if you wanted to. I hope you enjoyed learning a couple more ways that you can use Distress Spritz to add that touch of shimmer and shine to your projects. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you can join me on a more regular basis. Hit the like if you enjoyed this video, and if you want to join me on my other social media platforms, you can find the links to those in the description box below. Also, feel free to leave me a comment if you have any questions or if there's something you'd love to share with me and our community. I'll see you in the comments below and in the next video. Until next time, stay crafty, my friend.